He's done it before, but how does Scott Frost rebuild a winning culture a second time at UCF?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gian. Thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For the first word on today's show is my guy, Jay Crane from Crane & Co. over at the Daily Wire, college football analyst and sports savant, better extraordinaire. You wear a lot of hats, Jake. But
I try.
Before we get into today's topic, I got to get your quick thoughts on that national title game last night. I had money on Ohio State, and boy, did they deliver.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you had Ohio State minus 8.5, you were getting pretty worried there late, especially when, Notre Dame cut it to 8. But obviously Jeremiah Smith on that 3rd and 11 came through. The first drive by Notre Dame, you had a lot of people overreact because it's a long game, number one. But, the amount they ran Riley Leonard in that first drive and then being on script as opposed to being off script, they're two totally different things. And Ohio State, look, gravity's a real thing. Ohio State didn't make the big mistakes, something that, I talked about all week. Notre Dame has forced people to make mistakes. I don't want to make it sound like they have nothing to do with it, but if Ohio State didn't screw up, it was going to be very tough for Notre Dame to win that game, and they didn't. Made the plays they had to when they had to, made the adjustments that they needed to make throughout the game, and they were just a better team. But I thought Notre Dame, showed a lot of guts, a lot of grit coming back the way that they did. Riley made some throws late in that game that were really upper echelon that he wasn't making earlier in the game. But glad it ended up being, a fight at least, because there for a while it looked like the door was about to get blown open.
It did. Look, ultimately an 8 seed won the inaugural 12-team playoff. So I think that it was a success. I thought they should have capped it at 8 maybe, but we'll live with it for now. But the end of the national championship marks the beginning truly of the offseason for everybody. We are in the offseason, and now it's time to turn our attention to offseason things, the least of which is rebuilding a winning culture for Scott Frost down in Orlando. Look, UCF fans were over Gus. They were over the excuses. They were over the stagnant office. They were over it. Hell, I was over it watching it. So now if you're Scott Frost, you've done it here before. You've got the enthusiasm. You've got the backing. Jake, you've done this, man. You've coached at this level. How do you start to rebuild a winning culture when it feels like for the last couple of years, all you've been doing is losing?
Yeah, well, obviously the things that come to the forefront are the personnel, not only that you have from a player standpoint, but from the coaching staff around you. That's where it's got to start. You have to have a clear message from day one. But it's one thing to say something. It's another thing to enforce it. And that's where the buy-in from the staff around you, really comes into the clutch. You got to practice what you preach. You can't sit here and talk about accountability and discipline and this, that, and the other and not enforce it from the start. Because if you're going to change something, you need to show consistency first. And that bleeds down to the players. So whatever the mandate is for Scott Frost, people use sayings, this, that, and the other, iron sharpens iron or this or that, whatever. It needs to be clear from the beginning. It needs to be enforced from the beginning. And you have to treat everyone the same. Just because a guy may be an all-conference player coming back doesn't mean you treat him differently than a walk-on. That's how you establish it. But you also have to instill confidence. And that's something that's a process that, even in outside of sports, if you're a branch manager or you're somebody that's in charge of other employees or people, you want to be able to instill confidence. You want to be able to give them enough freedom to where they feel like they can be themselves, but it's within the realm and the sphere of what you want it to be. So it's a balance to strike, but you got to prove it by proving it. Like, again, you can't let guys cut corners, treat everybody the same. And that's how you build it. It permeates. You find out who's really going to be about it and who's not. Because a lot of guys in the beginning, I've had guys be like, Coach, I'm all in, it's I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it's like New Year's resolutions. 2 weeks go by and you're back eating candy bars again and doing all the stuff that you said you weren't going to do. So Scott knows this. And a lot of it is about the guys you surround yourself with in those leadership positions, not only the players, but the coaches as well.
Yeah, it occurs to me that building an elite winning culture is about building winning habits. So, like you said, when you referenced the New Year's resolutions, there, can you get guys to buy in to the simple things like training, getting enough sleep at night, staying out of the clubs on the weekends, right? Focusing on their craft in the off season, because like I know, once the season starts, it's too late to fix it for most players, right?
Yeah.
So, if you don't get strong in the offseason, right, you're not going to suddenly find a bunch of strength when games get here. If you don't build endurance in the offseason, you're not going to find that suddenly. And I think that Scott Frost has to focus on building those elite habits with his players this offseason. And to the extent that they didn't have that, it shows up at the end of games. Jake, like I know, if you quit in practice, you will 100% quit in a game.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, if you skip reps in the weight room, it shows itself on 4th and 1. That's when you really find out. It's karma. That's just the way it works. And look, sometimes it doesn't always. You could do everything right, and Mark Andrews drops a pass on a 2-point conversion to tie the game.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it goes down like that, but you got to put yourself in that position, or at least try and put yourself and your guys in the best position possible to be the most efficient that team, that roster, that coaching staff, that program can be. And then you let the chips fall where you may. But, to your point, teams are built in winter workouts. Teams are built in spring practice. Teams are built in summer workouts. And by the time fall camp comes around, if you're still having to try and put the basics together, the simple pillars, you're already behind the 8 ball, and you're not going to be able to win at the level that you want to win. You may be able to get away with some things, but it starts early and it becomes habits. And they are little things. It's not just the lifting weights. It's not just the not going out partying all the time. That doesn't mean you can't go have fun. Nobody's saying that, but it's within, the bounds of being mature. It's not putting yourself in bad situations. It's hanging out with guys, right? And not just guys from your position group. It's the DBs hanging out with the offensive line. It's building that rapport, because at the end of the day, when you got to look each other in the eyes, when it's 4th and 1, right? And you may be on the field, you may not be on the field. Those are the things that matter. Those extra inches, that extra effort. That's the difference when the margins are so small.
Agreed. It's all part of the process, Jake. And in the offseason, again, that's where that winning mindset is built. Looking forward to seeing how Scott Frost establishes that in year one back in Orlando, and if we see any of that any evidence of that in the spring, and particularly in the spring game. But hey, part of this process is vetting through the guys that you inherited, getting the most out of them, and figure out what to do with that. We're going to talk about what he does with this roster right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Jake, I bet Ohio State to beat Oregon. I bet them to beat Notre Dame. Ohio State made me money. I know you made some money. Tell me about the money you made on FanDuel.
Yeah, well, it's in the state of Tennessee. Unfortunately, we can't do player props for college, which, again, that's the state of Tennessee. It's got nothing to do with FanDuel. But as far as I had Ohio State minus 8.5, I had Ohio State over 3.5 touchdowns. When it came to Notre Dame, a lot of people were on the under. I actually bought the over down to 44.5. Probably should have left it at 45.5. But no, man, made a decent amount of coin. But I tell you, college basketball has been good to me. I'm afraid to even talk about it because I'm going to jinx it. Hit an $1,800 parlay the other day. But no, man, it's a fun time. To be honest with you, I love betting college basketball more than anything. I'm actually like a low key huge college basketball fan. But no, it's there was a good amount of money. My brother won $4,000 during our live stream of the national championship game, just betting overs. So it's a lot's out there, and you got to be smart. You can never bet more than you can lose. It's like walking in the casino.
Yeah, look, if you guys don't follow Jake, follow him. He shares his bets sometimes. I've made some money following you. You should
I'm a
too.
giver. I'm a giver, Mike.
Well, give to our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. You're guaranteed $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Jake, you got to vet through the roster, and you've got to make hard decisions about the roster and what should carry over. Now, this is the hard part of the job, I think, that no coach likes, is possibly telling a kid, you're not going to play here, right? If you are a UCF player right now, how are you showing this coach that you belong on this roster and that he needs you next spring? And if you're Scott Frost, how are you determining who your guys are in reevaluating what you were left?
Well, from the player perspective, you're just trying to do everything right. You're very open and perceptive to something new. Obviously, what was going on before wasn't working. They want to win too. You're not putting all this time in to lose. So you got to be willing and open to change things, even if it's harder. It's better if it's harder, because I think you're going to get a better result. Now, from the coaching standpoint, this is the easiest question you can ever ask me. I was always just blatantly honest. Whenever I would go somewhere new or we would have, some sort of changing of the guard, I would always just tell the truth. If I don't think that you can play or you're not going to play, I'm going to tell you. I would say, Mike, listen, I want what's best for you. Even if we don't have this, as long of a relationship, if I'm new here, I don't think you're going to be able to play here. I think you need to hop in the transfer portal. Any help that I can give you, any recommendation to certain places, I will do that. If you're a guy that there may be a question whether or not you could play here, I'm going to tell you that. You got to prove it to me. There's some things I see that I like. There's some things I see that I don't like. And I'm going to give you enough time to prove to me whether or not, you can play here. And then if you're a guy that's a really good player, I had no problem sitting the guy down and be like, listen, you're an integral part of us taking the next step, right? We know you're a good player, but you're not nearly where I can get you. So one, you got to trust me. I got to trust you. And even though what you've been doing has worked, it's not working as good as it possibly could. And whether you want to play the next level or not, your goal ought to be as an efficient and as a potential reaching player as possible. And if you give me a chance and do what I ask, and I'm receptive to you. If there's things that maybe, since I don't know you, you're more comfortable with your zone turn than your man turn right now. Let's work on those things. Let's become an even more complete player. So it's just being honest, because if you sit here and lie to a guy, it's amazing, good, bad, or different. If I think you can't play and I tell you can, and then you don't play, even though you've done everything right, you're going to be upset. If you're a guy that I think's a player that can really play, and that you need to trust me, and I sit here and tell you I don't think you're very good, and I lie to you, eventually you're going to find out. And that permeates its way throughout the team. I was just always going to be honest. From the jump, it's the best way to do it. I'm not going to BS you. I'm not going to string you along, because how can I ask you to go run full speed to another grown man if you don't trust me?
Yeah, when we talk about this conversation, I think about quarterback, and I think about Dylan Risk. And you talk about a guy who was fourth string last year and elevated himself to first through the poor play of others. Quite honestly, I mean, it was actually impressive that he went from fourth to first and nobody got hurt. Right? KJ Jefferson played poor. EJ Colson wasn't ready. Ja'Curry Brown couldn't get it done with his arm. And suddenly, by midseason, you're Dylan Risk and you find yourself at the helm of a Big 12 program. So, how real is that? If you're Scott Frost, when you're looking at a guy like Dylan Risk and you're thinking, hey, was this just overlooked talent, or was he fourth string for a reason? And what's my messaging to him, right? How quickly do I say, look, you got a chance to be the starter here. You're just as talented as everybody else. And, at what point do I say to him during the spring, look, son, you're not a quarterback. And I've been a part of these conversations on the player side where a coach has had to tell a player, look, I don't think you're a quarterback. A lot of times the players disagree with the coach's assessment. And then on the flip side of that, Jake, getting guys maybe to switch positions and play another position where they may be suited. If you grew up your whole life thinking, hey, I'm going to be a running back, And you come to college, and you and I, we covered Auburn. I saw this a lot during the Tuberville years down there. They convinced a lot of guys, listen, if you switch from D-line to O-line and put on some weight, you'll make a lot of money in the NFL. And those guys trusted the process and did it. How much of that is going on this spring for Scott Frost?
Well, there's going to be a decent amount of it. Again, when you look at the roster, I'm not 100% sure where they're going to land on some guys. I know with the transfer portal the way it is, I probably the best way to go about it is, look, you're going to have a shot, but I'm going to bring in other guys here to push you, and there's going to be a competition. And you either tell the guy straight up, listen, I think if you want to make the most money or put yourself in the position possible to be the best player you can be and possibly play at the next level, you need to change positions. Or you can frame it as, listen, I'm bringing in some guys that compete with you, but here's the beautiful part about your ability. Even if it doesn't work out at quarterback, we can find another spot for you. There's not a lot of guys you can say that about. So it just depends on where they land on it, who they're bringing in, what system they want to run. And again, if you bring in a quarterback that's better and you want to play him, but you can move risk to another position and it makes your team better, well, now you got a 2-for-1.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you've got some work to do with this roster. You need these guys. You need these guys for year one. So you can't throw the whole roster away just because they didn't win. You've got to find a way, I think, there's a balance, I think, in messaging between.
You got to trim the fat, but you can't throw away the whole steak.
Oh, yeah, correct. Yeah. And then making these guys believe that they can win, right? UCF should have beat Arizona State, who ended up in the college football playoff. That was a competitive game. They were in games this year, so I think there's a message there that, hey, we were close. You guys were close, and I'm going to get you over the hump. And going back to our previous segment, when you talk about building a winning culture, this is how I'm going to get you guys over the hump. If you buy in, you'll be a part of this roster, and if not, then good luck to you. There's the portal.
Yeah, and a lot of it is about, again, doing the little things. You got to win every day, and you win in different ways. It's continuing to understand when it gets harder, you have to go harder. And it's not just throwing cliches out there. You get to know these guys. You understand kind of what buttons to push. But if I'm Scott Frost, it's pretty simple. I walk in the room and say, hey, the funny thing is, I don't even have to prove to you guys that I can win here. I've already done it. Like, look at this ring. I know how to do it here. I know the way. Yeah. Like, he has kind of an extra, arrow in his quiver of he's done it at this place. So help me, help you, help us. And if we go about it this way, and if we do the things I'm asking, you will leave the field happier than you've ever been in your life, and we can recapture that magic. There ain't no shoulda. There's no woulda, coulda, any of that stuff. There's a winner and a loser. And I didn't come here to lose. You didn't come here to lose. So while we're here, we might as well make hay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Through that process, you got to vet the roster, but you have to identify who your leaders are. We're going to talk about how he does that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks, Jake, the place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in winnings. Prize Pick has changed the game in daily fantasy sports, whether it's the college football playoffs where you and I made some money. Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of the football action. Look, the NFL playoffs have been riveting so far this year. We've gotten some great games. The performance, I had a prop on Saquon Barkley that on Prize Picks that was crazy. And I don't know if you watched that Philly game, but Saquon put on a show.
He's basically a snowmobile.
I'm going to stop laughing about that one. But if you want to bet on the snowmobile, do it with our friends at Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Jake, you need leaders. You need leaders on this team. And after you've rebuilt a winning culture and you've sorted through your roster, somebody's got to step forward and say, this is my team. Ideally, it's the quarterback a lot of the times. But if you're Scott Frost, how do you produce leaders from this process that you can turn to and say, put this team on your back, Be the example every day in practice, every day in workouts, and in all the small things to make sure that guys buy in and they're doing the things that we need them to do to win, right? So you've got a process. You need buy-in from your leaders, and to some extent, I've heard coaches say the best led teams are player-led teams. So what do you think about him finding leaders this offseason?
Well, as far as finding them, they produce themselves. I don't care if you're a senior or a freshman. I mean, we have the program, we follow the program, and the strongest are going to find their way to the forefront. That's the easiest part about the whole thing. The problem you get in is when you pick leaders before you even start. They've got to produce themselves. You got to prove it to me. Not only prove it to me, prove it to the rest of your teammates. And that's by, not just talking the talk. It's walking the walk. That doesn't mean you have to be the best player. Some of the best leaders I've ever been around weren't the best players. But they're able to rally guys, and you can look and point and say, hey man, look at the way this guy works. Look at the way he operates. Look at the way he handles his business as a man. So you don't force it. It's got to bubble to the top. And when you do that, you don't have to the players aren't looking around saying, oh, well, he's just a coach's pet. No, you've proven it on the field, off the field. They show themselves, and you're right. The best teams are player-led teams. That's what you want. You want players to be able to police their own locker room, and you do that by treating everybody the same and see the cream rise to the top.
Yeah, those workouts, I think, are really where leaders are produced. Though that guy that always gets that extra rep in. I'm a big weight room guy. And I think that in those workouts is where you show who's going to show a leadership mentality, who's going to encourage his teammates to not give up on that extra rep. Again, we mentioned it in the earlier segments. If you quit in the weight room, you're going to quit on your teammates in the game. Period. Right?
Yeah, well, and look, I used to tell my guys all the time, everybody get excited about the first 2 weeks. Everybody's excited about that. I don't want guys that are just excited about the first 2 weeks or the first week of spring practice. I want guys excited day 11 of spring practice. I want guys excited the 4th week of workouts. Because again, it's easy to sit here and be like, yeah, coach, I'm going to do it. It's just like the New Year's resolutions I brought up. For 2 weeks, man, you're doing everything that you said you were going to do. But then all of a sudden you fall back in those old habits, in that old routine. So anybody can fake it for a little bit. I want the real ones that we can get in the thick of this thing when we get in the dog days of summer, when, it's spring practice and it's hot as heck out there and you're hitting each other in inside drill and this, that, and the other, and you're tired of hitting on each other and your legs hurt and your shoulder hurts and your neck hurts. You're still willing to do the work. You're still willing to get in there and grind. That's where it really shows itself.
Absolutely. Look, end of the day, Scott Frost has got to win games, and he needs guys to step up and bring that consistent energy every day. One of my favorite quotes, they say, forget your motivation, right? What you need is discipline, right? Because there are going to be days where you don't feel motivated to go out and do it, Jake. Hell, there are days we probably wake up and don't feel like doing things we have to do, but your discipline is what keeps you going day to day. And that consistent process is what produces greatness. And if you're Scott Frost, you've got to instill a sense of discipline in your team in the spring, so they will display that discipline in games. Look, you're displaying discipline every day at the Daily Wire. Before we get out of here, man, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, man, look, you can find us there. YouTube, it's Crane & Company, C-R-A-I-N and Company. We go live 2 to 3:30 p.m. Central each weekday. If you can't catch us live, we have live calls, a live chat that's always popping. It's on demand too, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We live stream a lot of games. We live stream the College Football National Championship, had over 300,000 views on that. We're going to live stream the AFC and NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. We do March Madness as well. It's if you haven't checked it out, check it out. If you like this show, I think you'll like it.
Guys, thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find them on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.